Welcome everyone to Zoom into Books this afternoon. We have a debut author with us today. It's Lynn Thompson, which is a pen name. The title of her book is Sudden Widow, and she is here to talk about her experiences in her book. Welcome, Bella.
Hi, how are you? How is everyone?
Thank you. We're fine. And I want to invite people on Facebook, if you have questions for Bella, to please type them in the comment section, and she will answer the questions during or after her presentation. So to start off, Bella, why don't you tell us about yourself and how this book came about?
So in life, I'm a senior adjunct professor at a university, and I also am a clinical psychologist. Obviously, the book came about because my husband died, but it's not as simple as that. I actually, after my husband died, many people asked me to buy a book that came out soon after he passed away, and the book was written by somebody who had very different issues than I had as a widow. Basically, she was a multimillionaire, and I absolutely understand she had a different journey than mine, but I felt like it wouldn't be helpful to the average widow that's worried about bills or worried about how they're going to do certain things alone. So one of the reasons I wrote the book was because everyone kept asking me to read this book that I wasn't interested in, and I wondered what else was out there. Life Before is part of the book that's a love story. It's part of the beginning of the book, and it's how I met my husband and what happened in our life, obviously, for the first 21 years that I knew him. One of my favorite stories is how I met him in a park. And he was riding his bike every day. I was jogging every day, and he came up to me at one point and I guess was flirting. And eventually I walked right up to him, asked him who he was, how he was, and from then on, we really started talking and dating. When I continue in the book, I talk about how he passed away and what happened and the day he died. And the day he died happened to be a day when he was best man at his best friend's wedding. So he died taking pictures before the wedding, which was very, very crazy. And I didn't find out until I got to the church and I had to drive to the hospital. It was the worst drive of my life. And my kids were in the back in their suits. I was in a little black dress. And when I got to the hospital, he had already passed away. So after that, my life changed. And I don't think I slept for the first 6 months after he died. It was so hard. The first couple of days were surreal. I was numb and couldn't believe it. One thing I found in my grief, even though everyone grieves differently, is that unlike what other people perceive as the stages of grief, sometimes emotions erupt and flow like volcanoes, even after a long silence. And in my book, I talk about this hitting me like a Mack truck. So there are moments now, and especially the first couple of years, where I don't know what's going to trigger it, but a wave of sadness, grief, trauma comes over me, and I can't control it. So,
were you able to, did you have family and friends, I'm sure, who came to comfort you? How did the beginning periods of that go for you?
I had a ton of support at the beginning. I would say for the first 2 to 3 months, the community was wonderful. My family was wonderful. My friends were wonderful. And at a certain point, people start leaving. And you hear this in grief groups and bereavement groups, that at a certain point, people start going back to their lives. And I don't think they mean, I think that they may think that you don't need them as much anymore. Maybe they can't handle grief and death. It was really hard for some of my friends to be around my boys who were 9 and 11 when my husband died, see them upset and see me upset. So some of those relationships changed. And so not all the friends stayed, and my relationships with my family and my friends changed over that time. So people helped, but I think a recurring theme in my book is that I still felt very alone, and I did a lot by myself.
I know that for a lot of people, writing is therapy. And usually the goals to write a book is to help actually yourself and help others. And I know you talked about a book that someone kept wanting you to read. Have you found other books not satisfactory to help you personally? Is that one of the reasons that people can pick up your book, and maybe it's more frank or more helpful in many ways?
I found some books sugarcoating things, and I don't think my book sugarcoats as much. So I do think that the books that I did read or breezed through, skimmed even, really had this overall positive attitude. And in a way, my book says, even in the title, how much it can suck, because it does suck. It sucks to be a 46-year-old widow. It sucks to have to watch my kids devastated over their father's death. And it sucks to have to start a whole new life when I never thought I would have to, when I thought I would have Paul by my side. I thought I would have my husband by my side for the rest of my life. So I think my book really says, listen, life isn't necessarily as good as it was, but I still really try to live my life the best way I can, because I know that that's what my late husband would want. And I think it might not be that different than some books in certain ways. I think the rawness, the authenticness, the straightforwardness, I think is very different.
How long did it take you to write this book?
I feel like it took me years. I started the book 2 years after my husband died. And what's not in the book is 2 years ago, which is 3 years after my husband died, my husband's sister died almost the same exact way my husband died, of a massive heart attack. And at that point, I kept saying, I'm going to publish this book. I'm going to publish this book. After she died, it was like a lightning rod that said, you're either going to publish it or you're not, because we don't know if we have tomorrow. So get working on it. And I spent another year, I would say, rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it. I gave it to my editor, Beth Werner of Author Connections. She's the best. And she just helped me so much over another maybe 6 months of rewrites to make it a much, much better book.
Oh, that's great. Beth Common Warner has a wonderful company called Author Connections, and she is an excellent editor. And if any authors are out there who would be interested, I'll post the link in the Facebook feed. There's also a link to Bella's website and a link to purchase her book. For those of you who have just joined us on Facebook, We're talking on Zoom into Books today with Bella Lynn Thompson, who is the author of Sudden Widow. Tell us about, we were talking earlier about the, what the 5 phases of a loss emotionally can be. And you were comparing your personal experience to, and I know you are a psychologist, to what the books say, quote unquote. Would you like to speak to us about that?
The books say that there are certain stages in grief, and my grief wasn't like that. I've obviously been in bereavement groups. Some widows never get angry. I was really angry. I cried as well, but I was angry. So I think learning about the stages and reading about different stages is wonderful, but again, everyone grieves differently. It's a personal journey. And excuse me, mine was not just, you can't even put into words the loss I felt, the heartbreak I felt, but also a lot of anger. So at one point, and I say this in the book, I was working out 2 hours a day because I was so angry. I tried kickboxing with like a retired kickboxer who was younger than me. And he said, I think you're too angry for this. Like, calm down, you're gonna hurt me. And I'm 5'2" and weigh 120, 125 pounds. So I was very angry, and I did try to do something constructive to work it out. But again, I think the stages are different for everybody. I went from anger to apathy, not caring, like it says on the slide, anger to sadness, anger to not caring. Just recently, I saw a post on one of the grief Facebook groups that said, I'm stuck in grief. I just can't even, I'm frozen. And I think that's not mentioned, but it is something that a lot of people grieving feel. They feel stuck in their day, stuck in their grief, and they don't know how to move out of it, physically, mentally, in any way. So I think that's not talked about a lot.
I agree. It's very hard for people to move forward. Some people set goals, and I think we were talking about the fact you have set goals for yourself. Sometimes little, sometimes big. How have you handled it?
So for me, I did set up goals, multiple goals. I kind of almost laughed at myself setting up the goals, because I thought, why would I have to write this down? Why can't I just do this? But I really say in my book, it might be a good idea to write them down, because you can look at this short list and try to accomplish one thing on those days you're frozen. So I set up a personal goal to try to be the best mom I could be, a spiritual goal just to find peace and flow with life, a cognitive goal because I always like to learn, a professional goal, figuring out maybe what the best thing to do now with my profession, a physical goal, which I already touched upon. I really tried to get into great shape, stay in great shape, and work out my anger by going to the gym or running. And I had a silly goal. My silly goal was an entertainment goal, because I was in graduate school and then went right into practice. I really missed years of movies. So my silly goal was to try to catch up on all those movies everyone talked about. On my worst day, I just watched a movie. On those days that I was stuck, on a Saturday that I couldn't move besides what I needed to do for my kids, I would watch a movie. On my best days, I tried to touch on 3 of them or 5 out of the 6.
That's good advice. What have you done with your kids? I know that family, I'm sure you all are closer. As you help them get through their grief. It's hard when all of you are grieving the same. So how have you handled it, and what have you done with your kids to help them get through these tough times?
The beginning, we went to a wonderful bereavement group specifically for kids. Kids were in one room, separated by ages, and adults, the widow or widower was in another room. And we did that probably for the first 3 months. And my kids benefited from that, but they really wanted to be privately in therapy. So we started private therapy, and that therapist I talk about in my book is still with us today. And my kids still reach out to him, and we still see him sometimes once every 2 months if things are going well, and sometimes once a week if we need more support in any way. So that's been ongoing since my husband died.
Well, that's good. And in your profession, are you a therapist? What is your, or do you teach?
Right now I teach. I specifically am not a straight therapist in my profession. I am more related to neuropsychology, which is more brain behavior relationships. So in my practice, I did testing to diagnose different things like learning disorders for kids and problems with adults. If somebody had a traumatic brain injury, I would help find out what happened, what was wrong with them, to help identify what areas cognitively, emotionally, and otherwise they needed to work on.
So your profession actually was a plus to help you get through your grief, I would think.
I think it is, and I think it's not. I think, I guess I had a lot of insight and had to go through periods of therapy myself to get through my profession. And I think I'm a perfectionist, so I think that made it worse. I say in the book at one point, I'm not grieving efficiently, even though professionally I knew that you can't grieve efficiently. So it helped, and at other times, I think, I over-intellectualize things when I couldn't make sense of why I couldn't be over things faster or feel better faster. So, but I certainly had more insight into what my kids, I think, were feeling.
That's true. I really hadn't thought about the fact it could be detrimental for you, but very helpful for your children, really. We have a question from Beth on Facebook. When can you get a few hours away to yourself, and what is your favorite thing to do?
My favorite thing to do before COVID was go to my gym, and I would spend, after the kids were settled, either very late in the evening after they did their homework and I fed them dinner, or while they were in school. My job is not an 9 to 5 job. It's at different times, so I could do work at unorthodox hours. My favorite thing was to go to the gym and spend 2.5 hours there. During COVID, I cannot go to the gym right now. So I miss that a lot, but that is by far my favorite thing. Now I go for walks when I can, and I take walks at the beach.
Oh, that's great. That's good therapy too. Tell us about, we were talking before we started about the immediate things you had to jump into that no one ever thinks about, particularly at a young age, that immediately affected you, your family, and your finances.
At the end of my book, I have a section that's not really part of the book. It's after the end of my story, I would say, that's entitled What You Need to Do But Don't Want to. And it really outlines what I did the first 5 weeks after my husband passed away, you really have to be aware of dates and deadlines and how many death certificates you need. If you have a will, where you have to take that, what you have to do with, you have to remember that there are a lot of deadlines for health insurance, for if your spouse held the health insurance, and you really have to make sure you're changing accounts and leaving an account open under your spouse's name as an estate account. You have to know what happens if you own a house, or really if the bank owns a house and you're paying a mortgage on it. And there are some deadlines, like with, it sounds funny, but with dental insurance and health insurance, that you really have to be aware of. And I found some of the widows I talked to, without outside help, they would have missed some of those. And I had a ton of help the first 5 weeks. Some of my friends were coming for 2 to 3 hours a day, making sure I filled out all the paperwork to make sure that the insurance paperwork was done, that the benefits were carried over and all that stuff. So you really have to reach out to trusted people.
There's so much that becomes evident so quickly. We always think that we're going to live forever, and many people don't think about making this list of things to do, and it's something that really everyone should sit down maybe every 10 years, maybe sooner, to go over for both parties. Thank goodness that you had people around to help you, because sometimes people don't. What would you recommend for people? Do you have resources in your book?
Absolutely. There's a ton of resources for different types of help at the back of the book. There's even another book that people might want to read. There are grieving forums for widows, for children. So all of that is at the back of the book. And I definitely recommend that people reach out. One of the things I say, I reached out to my children's school and made sure they had somebody to talk to during the day. I think that did help, that I am a psychologist. I knew that they could maybe have a trigger or have their Mack truck moment, like I was talking about before, in school. And I reached out to the school to make sure they could leave a class without getting in trouble and have someone to talk to. My children never used it, by the way, but they did have that. It's funny, the first year after my husband passed away, my older son has obsessive compulsive disorder, and the school let him call me. He called me up to 3 times a day to make sure I was alive the first year after my husband died. And if I didn't answer, he was very nervous. So there are things that people don't know happened and don't know even happen that I guess affect children.
Absolutely. I think even when a grandparent or parent or friend passes away, their first thought is, am I going to die? And their second thought is, what about my mother, my father, my grandmother? And they do need a lot of reassurance, particularly for young children, because it's a concept that's hard for them to understand. Have you found that?
I was very lucky. I think that my older son, who was 11, really was able to process it. I wasn't lucky with my younger son. My younger son really took years to process it. He was really numb and apathetic for the first 3 years, I think. And even with therapy, we talked about it, because we just talked about my husband openly. I told stories. Every time I told a story, I have a smile from ear to ear, just telling stories about how funny my husband was, how much he used to, I remind them that he chased me around the house to pinch me and told me what a pain in the tush I was, and then grabbed me and hugged me, or, kind of gave me a passionate bent over kiss right in front of the kids, you know, and we would all laugh. So we talked openly about it a lot, and I think that was helpful. My psychologist recommended a babysitter that was male. I think that was helpful. And the babysitter I have now still lost his dad a year before, and I think that helped my children. They all talk about lost his dad quickly and unexpectedly, and they all still talk about that loss together. And I think it's a way for them to talk about it outside of me. That was very helpful too. He doesn't come all the time or often, but when I had to work or went out, he would come, and he still does. And I think that that helped them process a lot.
Oh, that's good. That's a great idea too, to have another male influence on their lives. For everyone just joining us on Facebook Live, we're here on Zoom into Books with Bella Lynn Thompson and her debut novel, Sudden Widow. Bella, I see the next slide up says dating. Well, maybe not. So would you tell us about your experiences and when you decided to take this step, which some people really, they may never take, and how you felt about it?
I think it was funny. My children, we were such a cohesive family while my husband was alive. My children really just wanted, they thought I could get a replacement. They were very young, and they would say, can't you just go, you know, like they thought I could go just date somebody and they could be dad, just somebody to go to their baseball games or somebody to do something. So I used to joke with them the first year, you know, what do you want me to do? Go to Walmart? There's a dad aisle. I can pick one up. What size? And they thought it was hysterical. At least they laughed. After about a year, a year and a half, I started dating, and my kids really encouraged that. It's the opposite, I think, of what people thought. I took this step. I thought in my own mind at the time, being in love is a beautiful thing. So, you know, I have to try this again because my life seemed richer with somebody else in it that I was in love with. And that's why I took the step. It didn't exactly turn out the way I wanted it to. In my book, in the chapter, I have a bunch of fake categories that I ended up, very fake, ridiculous categories I ended up putting the dates I had in. And I have a doozy of quotes of some of the lines I got. I could read one or two. One of them, first date, I like choking women in bed. Does that bother you? Happened to be the last date. Another one that I got on more than one occasion, even just after talking to people on the phone and maybe having one or two dates. Really, do we have to label our relationship? Can't we just have sex? I think my favorite is after waiting for a gentleman in a restaurant for some time, but seeing he was in his car, he came in and said, sorry, I'm late. And in my mind, all I thought was, no problem. I saw you were online chatting with other women on the same dating website we met on. So my experience dating wasn't necessarily a great one. I don't think my attitude was right. I really wasn't ready to date when I started dating. And I think if I decide to dive back into that, I would be more ready now.
Sure. I've talked with other people about, I've published an author who does dating and relationships, and she has similar stories. We just have a comment from Facebook that says, kids ask the best and most truthful questions. So that's a fact too. So you decided to take the plunge to dating and then found it didn't work out so good. What are your feelings now? And are you dating anyone, going out with anyone, or thinking about it?
I'm not. At the moment, I do get lonely. I think that Valentine's Day is coming, you know, Christmas, Hanukkah, the New Year came and went, Thanksgiving, various different holidays. I think it's hard, but I don't know if I'm ready. I am very overwhelmed with my kids. It is COVID, so I think it's harder to date. And because of COVID, I'm a single mom, and both my kids are sometimes being homeschooled. So I know I don't have time for it now. So I think that's a great excuse not to get involved for the moment. Once things lighten up over the summer, I'll rethink. But I do have single friends I go out with. In the book, I mentioned one of a single male friend that I go out with, but we're not at all romantically involved.
Well, that's fun to do. The relationship of friendships are very supportive and can be helpful too. You mentioned COVID in this year of the pandemic last year. Has this been a good thing for you and your children? Maybe you had more time to grieve and move forward. Do you think it was helpful or not?
I mean, in a positive light, I think we are closer than we would have been. I think we were pretty close before. Truthfully, I don't think it's helpful for my kids to be home this much. I think a lot of kids are getting a little depressed and anxious being home from school. And I think that depends on where you live and your own personal situation. So, but for my kids, it hasn't been working out. I definitely think the bright side is we've gotten closer. I think the not bright side is we've had enough of each other, and it's hard to live in my home when we're always together. I think, you know, on a global note, I think it's a tragedy that so many people passed away. So, you know, that is just horrible.
It is hard to move forward. It's hard to move forward with when your life is so disrupted, with kids not being able to go to school and have their friends. You know, that's a good break from your situation, and it's a good way to start moving forward. Do you have a chapter or segment of your book you'd like to read?
I definitely think that I can read some excerpts.
That'd be great.
So one of the excerpts, starting from the beginning of the book, so I'm kind of going backwards, it's really the start of the book I'm reading. So it's life before. People speak about adversity as if it's a good thing. I'm not sure that's the case. Many think the worst part of becoming a sudden widow is losing someone you love. But it isn't only that. Dealing with the ramifications that branch out in every direction, recognizing that life as you knew it is over, sucks. Paul was by far the light of my life. Gorgeous, funny, sweet, helpful, and as reliable as the sun rising and setting. He was an even better father than spouse, and easily impressed others with his kid skills, not only with our children, but entertaining most he knew or spent time with. Even dogs and cats liked him. Don't get me wrong, my husband could be stubborn and a royal pain in the ass. He was not easy to live with, but given all of him, I was happier to put up with his shortcomings than live without him. We were together for 21 years, and 99.9% of the time, I would do it all over again, even knowing the outcome. I didn't love my husband because he was perfect. He wasn't. But I wouldn't trade a minute, an hour, a day, or a year we spent together for anything. Even if I fleetingly thought about divorcing him, every 3 to 6 months, and I would frequently tell him I was so angry I wanted to kill him. In truth, I never could. Paul often joked about killing me. Humor was by far his best quality. In fact, when one of my clients once threatened to hurt me, his response was, "There's no way he could want to kill you. The guy spent only 8 hours with you. I spent 20 years with you. Who is he? If anyone has the right to take you out, it's me." He joked about ending me after our second child was born. Barely 2 hours after I gave birth, his best friend came to visit. Without saying a word, Paul took the baby ever so gently from my arms, and his friend approached me with a pillow as if to smother me. They both said now that Paul had his 2 boys, my usefulness had expired, and then of course they roared with laughter. Paul and I met in the park in 1994. He was riding his bike, I was jogging. We had flirted with other people and each other for a week or two. At one point, I noticed him standing on the side of the track. Really, my assertive personality took hold. I walked right up to him and introduced myself in a business-like fashion. I put my hand out to shake his, said my full name, my job title, and where I worked at the time. He looked at me kind of in shock. I think he would have preferred for us to smile at each other for a couple more days or weeks and then let things happen organically. Not a formal business introduction. He didn't know then. I have no patience. I prefer to plow to the next step, no tiptoeing. Organically let it happen? Really? He was gorgeous. And as I jogged away from him, I remember concentrating to make sure my butt looked good. I had no idea how to do this or if it worked, but it was my sole focus at the time. About 10 minutes later, Paul rode up beside me and started chatting. His question was ridiculous. Something like, "I see you like running. How far do you usually run?" We spoke the whole time. I ran and then spent the next few evenings together after work, meeting in the park and talking for an hour or two. The next week I hurt my knee. I missed some evenings at the park. I remember the smile on his face when I came back a few days later. And in the sweetest of voices, he said, "Where'd you go?" I kept thinking, I don't know if this guy will ask me out on even one date, but if he does, I'm getting a picture because he would be by far the most gorgeous man I ever dated. He had the body of an underwear model, a beautiful smile with perfect white teeth, sparkling hazel eyes against tan skin and dark hair. He was definitely my type. He asked me out that night, and even though we were both sweaty and disgusting from exercising, we went to a fast food place to get acquainted. Paul asked me what I wanted out of life. I gave him an earful, dreams, ambitions, where I wanted to live, etc. When I asked him the same question, his answer was simple. I want to fall in love, get married, have kids, and be happy. What a line. Seriously, I couldn't believe he really meant it. It was too good to be true. Obviously, I was a bit cynical because fast forward, he meant it. After our first date, we saw each other almost every day till the day he died. So that's an excerpt from the first chapter.
Oh, it's a beautiful story. And what a wonderful way to start a relationship. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. We have a question from Facebook. I know it took you several years to write your book, and you had a goal in writing this book. And what is the main thing that you hope readers will take away from your book?
What I want them to take away and what they take away could be two different things, but I guess I hope the book offers one little bit of peace or understanding or validation to other widows or widowers. The inside scoop to you're not invited places when it's only couples. and people don't talk about it unless they're a widow or widower. You might get funny looks if you start talking to a dad on the baseball field that's married, because they think that you suddenly want to date him, even though you just asked what to ask the coach or how to word something because you weren't sure. I guess some of it is the inside scoop, and some of it's just my journey. And the inspiring end is that I did publish a book. I do want to make my life the best it can be now. I do want to power through and plow through the rest of my life and live the best way I can. So I guess it's the next slide. It's the main takeaway point, I guess, is that, you know, it's easy to get stuck in grief and not move. And we're here and we have to try and make the best of what we have. I am grateful every day for my kids. I'm grateful every day that I had my husband for 21 years. I'm grateful every day that my kids had a father that was very involved, even if he didn't stay. And I'm grateful my husband starved and helped me get through graduate school. We were very poor, and he stayed with me for 8.5 years through my graduate school and my first my internship, my postdoc, and first starting my business. I'm grateful for all that. And I guess a reminder to live and fight through it.
Bella, do you talk to groups? Do you talk to book clubs? I know that now everything is virtual. Have you been doing that in the past? Are you open to doing that?
I'm open to doing it. I am, people grab me for different things. So one of the widows groups that I belong to actually asked me to do a webinar on grief and the brain. So I'm doing that in March. And I'm part of another grief network, and I offered to talk, and they haven't scheduled me yet.
Well, that's great. How can people get in touch with you?
They can get in touch with me through Facebook or through my website. The last page is how to contact me. So my website is www.suddenwidow.com, and the last page is my contact information, so they can get in touch with me that way. It goes right to my email.
Well, that's good. I've also posted those links in the Facebook comments, along with a link to your book on where to get your book. We have another question, which is, do you plan to write another book, or are you working on a new book now?
I started a new book, kind of the next chapter, and I don't know what I'm going to call it. People who read the book, at least 2 or 3 comments, asked me to write a book on all the notes I took on my dating. So write like a widow's dating guide, because they found that chapter, I guess, funny. So I don't know if I'm writing that book. I have thought about it, but the second book I'm writing is more about my life now.
Well, that's good news. Well, Bella, thank you so much for coming on to Zoom into Books and sharing your book and your personal experience with us and the viewers. I want to thank everybody who joined us on Facebook, and this video will be available to watch on the Zoom into Books Facebook page and on Bella Lynn Thompson's Facebook page. And in a few weeks, it'll be available on the Zoom into Books YouTube channel, which you're invited to subscribe to. It's free. And we'll post the YouTube video when it's available. So thank you all for watching, and thank you, Bella, for joining us today.
Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.